Hello everyone, and welcome back to iKenSleep. I hope you all are doing well and taking good care of yourselves. It is currently the weekend before Valentine's Day, so happy early Valentine's Day to you guys. Whether or not you guys are celebrating it or not, it's fine. I hope you all are getting some love, either from others or from yourself. Doesn't matter, as long as you're getting love from somewhere, because you guys all deserve all the love in the world. Don't forget that. And just as a quick reminder before we get into the reading, per usual, I just wanted to say that if you are indeed enjoying my readings and would like to support me and would like for me to continue doing these, you guys can support me by leaving likes, sharing my stuff, leaving comments, and following me on my platforms like Spotify at iKenSleep, YouTube at iKenWin, TikTok at iKenWin, and on Instagram at officially.iKenWin. Now without any further ado, let's get back into Heaven Official's Blessing. Chapter 5, Red-Clad Ghost, the Burning of the Martial and Civil Temples. On the face of the boy, as Shilian had first suspected, there was a field of serious burn scars, except beneath the bloody scars, there were traces of 3 or 4 tiny faces. Those faces were no bigger than the palms of a baby, and they were scattered crookedly across his cheeks and forehead. After being burned, the features on each tiny face were shriveled in pain, as if screaming in agony. The sight of these weird screaming faces squeezing and squirming on a regular human face was indeed more horrifying than any demon. Shilian felt as though he were plunged into a nightmare the instant he saw this boy's face. A fear so immense paralyzed him until he couldn't recall standing up, nor tell what the expression on his face was. But it must have been intimidating. The boy was already on tenterhooks when he removed his bandages at that hesitant, slow pace. After seeing Shilian's reaction, he took a couple steps back, as if aware of Shilian's inability to accept that face of his. He suddenly covered his horrifying face and leapt up from the ground, then let out a shout and fled into the deep woods. Shilian finally came around and shouted, "Wait!" he called out as he chased after him. "Wait! Come back!" But Shilian had been dumbstruck for a good moment before he came around. The boy was obviously familiar with the mountain paths and used to escaping in the dark, so it took him no time to vanish completely. No matter how Shilian yelled for him, he wouldn't show himself. There was no one around to help Shilian search, and his powers had to be exhausted by now, so there was no way he could contact the others through the array. He ran all over the mountain, searching for a good part of an hour to no avail. A cold breeze blew past and cleared his mind a little. Knowing that running around aimlessly like a headless fly served no purpose, Shilian forced himself to calm down. Maybe he'll go back to take Xiaoying's body, Shilian thought as he returned to the Mingwang temple. But then, he stopped in his tracks. Many men dressed in black with grave expressions had gathered in the woods at the back of the temple, and they were in the midst of carefully unloading those 40-something upside-down corpses. A tall man with folded arms was standing before the woods, overseeing the operation. When he turned his head around, it was the exquisite yet cold face of a youth. It was Fu Yao. It looked like he had made a trip back and brought a number of helping hands along from the palace of Xuanzhen. Shilian was about to speak, but was interrupted by the sound of footfalls behind him. Nanfang had returned from sending the villagers away. Upon seeing the situation at hand, Nanfang glanced at Fu Yao and said, "Didn't you run away?" The comment was not pleasant to the ears, and Fu Yao raised his eyebrows in displeasure. Shilian didn't want them to start another argument at a time like this, so he said, "I asked him to find reinforcements." Nanfang sneered. Where are they? I thought you could at least ask your general to come personally." Fu Yao replied coolly. When I went back, I heard General Pei Jr. had already come to the scene, so I didn't bother our general. And even if I had, he's probably too busy to come anyway. Actually, based on Shilian's understanding of Mu Qing, Shilian was pretty sure that he wouldn't come even if he had the time. But under the present circumstances, there wasn't time to dwell on that. He said tiredly, "Stop your fighting for a moment and help me find the bandaged boy." Nanfeng frowned. "Wasn't he guarding that girl's body with you earlier?" "I scared him off after asking him to remove his bandages," Shilian replied. Fu Yao smirked. "Please, your cross-dressing isn't that terrifying." Shilian sighed. "It's my fault for being in a stupor. Miss Xiaoying's death was already a big shock to him. He probably couldn't take the blow of thinking that I was scared of his face, so he ran away." Fu Yao wrinkled his nose. "Is he really that ugly?" "It's not a matter of ugliness," Shilian replied. He has the human face disease." Hearing those 3 words, both Nanfang and Fu Yao froze. They finally understood why Shilian was shocked. 800 years ago, a plague swept across the kingdom of Shenle, and it wiped out the nation. Those who caught the plague would first develop small warts all over their bodies. Then as the warts swelled, the skin would grow rough. The swollen parts would slowly grow more uneven, with 3 indentations and 1 protrusion. Just like eyes, mouths, noses. The facial features would then metamorphosize until the warts eventually took on the shape of a human face. If they were left alone, more and more human faces would grow on their bodies. It was said that some of these human faces, once fully formed, could speak and even scream. They called this the human face disease. Fu Yao's expression went through a myriad of changes as he dropped his folded arms. "That's impossible. It was exterminated hundreds of years ago. There's no way it could reappear." "I'm not mistaken," Shilian only said. Nanfang and Fu Yao couldn't refute him. No one could refute this if it came from Shilian. Shilian continued. "There were many burn scars on his face, probably from self-inflicted burning to get rid of the faces. The first reaction of those who contracted the disease was usually to slice off the faces with knives or burn them away with fire. They would use any means possible to rid themselves of those lesions." Nanfang's voice turned solemn. "The boy is probably not a normal human being then. He has to be at least a few hundred years old. All else aside, is he contagious?" Even though this was a severe headache, it was a question Shilian considered calmly and logically, so he replied with conviction. "No. The human face disease is highly contagious. If he were still contagious, then the entire mountain would have been infected by now, considering how long he has been hiding here. His condition should already be cured, only the scars remain." They couldn't afford to be careless. Fu Yao seemed to have some real influence in the palace of Shenzhen and was able to call forth capable hands to help with the search. But no matter how deep they dug or how far they looked, they could not find any traces of the bandaged boy. Perhaps he had already fled Mount Yujun and vanished into the sea of people. The best they could do now was to return to the heavens. Request that the palace of Lingwen conduct a search and wait for news. Fortunately, the boy was not contagious, but Shilian thought of how horrifying he looked. If he was discovered after he left the mountains, he might end up hunted as a monster. It was best that they find him soon. Without further delay, Shilian picked up Xiaoying's body and descended the mountain. Since he was slightly out of it, he didn't realize he brought the body into the tea shop until the tea master yelled at him. Shilian immediately apologized and went back out to entrust Xiaoying's burial to someone else before re-entering the tea shop. After settling everything, he sat down and heaved a soundless sigh. This case was finally over, but Shilian thought that the few days since he ascended felt longer than an entire year of collecting scraps in the mortal realm. Climbing, jumping, flying, screaming, tumbling, disguising, and performing, his bones were going to collapse. Even then, there were still many mysteries and aftermaths left for him to deal with. Maybe he'd raise a barred banner and roam the world telling tales of how collecting scraps was better than ascension. Fu Yao lifted the hem of his robe and sat down next to him. Alas, he could no longer keep it in and rolled his eyes. "How much longer are you going to wear that thing?" It felt incredibly endearing somehow to see his eyes roll. Xilian finally took off the wedding dress, wiped away his makeup, then realized dejectedly, "Was I talking to General Pei Jr. in this dress the whole time? Nanfang, why didn't you remind me?" "Probably because you looked so obviously happy in it," Fu Yao replied. After running errands all day, Nanfang sat down for a rest too. "Don't worry about it. General Pei Jr. won't care. You can dress 10 times weirder and he won't tell anyone when he goes back." Xilian was grateful for all the errands this junior official had run and poured him some tea. He thought about how cool-headed General Pei Jr. was in the face of Xuanji's madness and commented, "General Pei Jr. is certainly calm and collected, very composed." Nanfang took a sip of the tea and said, "He may look well-mannered, but he's like his ancestor, difficult to deal with." That was something Xilian could of course see. Unbelievably enough, Fu Yao agreed too. General Pei Jr. is a Novu ascendant of the last couple hundred years, but he's got a strong tailwind and climbs the ladder pretty fast. When he was appointed Deputy General by General Pei, he was barely 20 years old. Do you know what he did? What? Xilian asked. He slaughtered an entire city, Fu Yao replied coldly. Xilian looked thoughtful on hearing this, but he wasn't surprised. In the upper court, kings and generals roamed. Regarding fighting for and protecting of one's land, it was said that the success of a general is built on the bones of millions. To reach godhood, one must first become a hero, but the path a hero walked was always bloody. Fu Yao concluded, "In the upper court, there aren't many who are trustworthy and worth meeting." Xilian thought it funny that Fu Yao sounded like he was speaking from experience and cautioning a newcomer. He wondered if Fu Yao only spoke because he had been bullied in the heavenly realm himself, and the experience had affected him deeply. But then again, even though Xilian had ascended 3 times, he never stuck around for long, so when it came to understanding the gods, he might actually know less than these 2 general officers. Nanfang, on the other hand, seemed to strongly disagree. "Don't listen to such inflammatory statements. There's good and bad everywhere. There are still a number of trustworthy officials in the heavens." "Huh, trustworthy officials? Do you mean your general?" Fu Yao sneered. Nanfang responded, "I don't know about my general, but definitely not yours." Xilian was long used to this kind of situation, and with other things on his mind, he didn't have the energy to pull them apart. The case in the north had concluded. The first thing Xilian did upon returning to the heavens was to report the bandaged boy to the palace of Ling Wen and place a request to search for him. Ling Wen took the request with a grave expression. "I will do my utmost to find him. Truly, I did not think this journey to the north would open such a giant can of worms. Thank you for your hard work, Your Highness." Xilian replied, "I have the 2 junior officials who volunteered to help to thank, and General Pei Jr. as well. I am sincerely grateful. This all came from relationship trouble caused by old Pei himself, so of course Junior has to take care of it. He's used to it, so there's no need to thank him," Ling Wen said. "If Your Highness is not busy, please enter the communication array. We are to have a meeting regarding what has transpired." Xilian also had many questions he'd like answers to. After leaving the palace of Ling Wen, he wandered about and found a small stone bridge. The stone bridge crossed a small gurgling stream with crystal clear waters. He could see the clouds drifting under the water, and through the flowing waters and clouds, there stood the rising and falling mountain ranges, as well as the vast, squarely erected cities of the mortal realm. This is a good place, Shilian thought. And so he sat on the head of the bridge, mouthed the password, and entered the communication array. It was one of those rare times when the communication array was bursting with liveliness, with voices echoing and reverberating from all directions. The first thing he heard was Feng Xin swearing. Holy fuck, have you all picked a mountain for the ceiling yet? That Xuanji is a mad woman. No matter what we ask, she only screams to see General Pei and tells us nothing useful about the location of the green ghost Qirong. General Pei Jr. responded. General Xuanji has always been stubborn and intense. Feng Xin yelled angrily. General Pei Jr., is your General Pei back yet? Let her meet him, then get the green ghost Qirong's location out of her and get rid of her. Feng Xin had never been good with women, and Shilian felt sorry that he was the one given the task of interrogation. General Pei Jr. replied, It doesn't matter even if they meet. She'll just become more insane. A voice came through. Another round of upside-down corpses. Qirong really is too crass. Disgusting. Even the ghost realm thinks he's vulgar. That means he truly is very much so. Words between the officials flew seamlessly around in the array, and it was clear that they were all on familiar terms with one another. As a newcomer who'd only just ascended again after an 800-year absence, Shilian should have laid low and remained silent. But after a while, he couldn't resist and asked, Everyone, what was with the upside-down corpses? Was Green Ghost Qirong in the area too? Shilian rarely spoke in the communication array, so his voice was foreign to many, and the officials did not know whether to respond. Surprisingly though, the first to answer him was Feng Xin. The Green Ghost Qirong wasn't at Mount Yujun. However, the upside-down corpses were offerings Xuanji presented to him, as per his order. Xuanji was a subordinate of the Green Ghost? Shilian asked. Correct, General Pei Jr. replied. Xuanji passed away many hundreds of years ago. She held a grudge, but was too powerless to stir up havoc until just over 100 years ago, when Green Ghost Qirong took a liking to her and took her under his wing. Only then did her spiritual powers improve by leaps and bounds. What he really meant was that the chaos Xuanji caused was not General Pei's fault, because she wasn't originally this strong. All blame should go to Green Ghost Qirong instead, since he was the one who took her under his command and gave her the power to cause harm. Everyone was already of the opinion that this sin was all General Pei's to bear, though no one said it out loud. Yet he noticed and spoke of it so openly in this reminder that it shut everyone up and made them hide their real thoughts deeper within. Shilian then spoke up again. Has Mount Yujun been thoroughly inspected? What about the child spirit? This time, Mu Qing's voice rang out. He said in an inscrutable tone, Child spirit? What child spirit? Shilian realized Fu Yao must not have reported every detail. Maybe his volunteering to help was even done in secret, so without mentioning Fu Yao to spare him any unnecessary problems, Shilian explained. When I was in the wedding sedan, I heard the giggles of a child who sang nursery rhymes as a word of caution. The two junior officials next to me didn't notice, which means that this child spirit must have remarkable powers. There were no child spirits found on Mount Yujun, Mu Qing stated. Shilian was confused. Perhaps the child spirit had come specially just to warn him? Thinking of this, Shilian was suddenly reminded of another matter that had been on his mind all this time. He asked, Speaking of which, I met a young man who can control silver butterflies at Mount Yujun. Does anyone know who he is? The noisy communication array suddenly fell completely silent. Shilian was expecting this reaction, so he simply waited patiently. A moment later, Ling Wen asked, Your Highness, what did you say just now? Mu Qing said coldly. He just said that he met Hua Chang. Upon finally learning the name of that young man in red, Xilian felt his spirits lift inexplicably. He smiled. So he's called Hua Chang? It's a fitting name for him. The tone of Xilian's voice rendered all the officials even more speechless. Another moment passed before Ling Wen cleared her throat. Your Highness, have you ever heard of the Four Calamities? Much ashamed, I only know of the Four Famous Tales, Xilian thought to himself. The so-called Four Famous Tales referred to the extravagant stories of the deeds of four gods prior to their ascension. The young lord who poured wine, the prince who pleased God, the general who snapped his sword, and the princess who slit her throat. Of course, the prince who pleased God alluded to the awe-inspiring display of the crown prince of Shenle upon the grand avenue of divine might. Having one's name among the four famous tales did not necessarily indicate that those four were the strongest of the gods. The four famous tales were as such simply because they were the most well-known and most spoken of. Xilian had always been slow on the uptake when it came to news from the outside world. He could even be said to be out of touch with the outside world and ignorant to its affairs. He only knew about the four famous tales because he was one of the four. The Four Calamities were probably something that grew popular later, but Xilian had never heard of the term before. Since it included the word calamity, it couldn't be anything good. Much ashamed, but I've never heard of them, Xilian said. Who are the Four Calamities? Mu Qing responded coolly. Your Highness walked the mortal realm for hundreds of years, and yet you are still so ill-informed. I'm really curious to know what you've been doing all this time. Eating, sleeping, busking, collecting junk? Duh. Xilian smiled. It's not easy being mortal. There are plenty of things to busy myself with, and they're all complicated. It's not easier than being a heavenly official. Please remember well, Your Highness, Ling Wen said. The Four Calamities are Ship-Sinking Blackwater, Night-Touring Green Lantern, White-Clothed Calamity, and Crimson Rain Sought Flower. They are the four ghost kings of the ghost realm, who cause endless headaches for all in the heavenly realm. Humans become gods when they ascend, ghosts when they fall. The gods created heaven to reside in, drawing a clear boundary between themselves and mortals. They watched from above and ruled from beyond reach. The ghost realm, on the other hand, was not separated from the mortal realm. Monsters, demons, ghosts, and mortals all shared one earth. Some ghosts hid in the darkness, and some pretended to be humans as they walked among the people and roamed the mortal realm in disguise. Ling Wen continued. Ship-Sinking Blackwater refers to a water ghost. Although he has reached supreme status, he's fairly low-key and rarely starts trouble. Not many have seen him before, so we won't mind him for now. Night-Touring Green Lantern refers to that vulgar, corpse-hanging green ghost Qirong. He's the only one in the four not yet a supreme. He is likely included because he's always causing trouble and is really quite annoying. Or maybe because four names are easier to remember, so he's just there to pad the numbers. We'll skip him too. White-Clothed Calamity should be someone Your Highness is familiar with. He's also known as White No-Face. Hearing the name, Xilian, who was sitting on the stone bridge, suddenly felt a stab of pain in his heart that spread all over his body. His hands began to shake, and he unconsciously clenched them into fists. Of course he was familiar. They say when a supreme is born, it can destroy an entire nation and throw the world into chaos. The first country White No-Face destroyed was Shenle. Xilian remained silent, and Ling Wen continued. In any case, White No-Face is already defeated. Even if he still exists somewhere in this world, it's now past his time in the limelight. Your Highness, The silver butterflies you saw at Mount Yujun are also called wraith butterflies. Their master is the last of the four, and one the world does not want to incur the wrath of. Crimson rain sought flower. Huachang. In the heavens, notorious was the word to describe the heavenly emperor and the crown prince of Shenle. Although the meaning of notoriety was completely different between the two, the word still resonated equally. However, in the ghost realm, there was only one worthy of being called notorious, and that was Huachang. If you wanted to learn about a god, simply walk into his temple and take a look at the way he was dressed and the weapons he wielded, and you'd more or less understand him. If you wanted to know more, simply listen to folk tales, plays, and stories passed down by word of mouth. A god's mortal past and deeds were well documented. Ghosts, on the other hand, not so much. The kind of person they were while still alive, and their appearance at present, were all a mystery. The name Huachang was very obviously fake, and his appearance was most likely fake too. In the rumors, he was sometimes a twisted boy given to capricious mood changes, sometimes a gentle and mannered handsome young man, sometimes a gorgeous seductress with a venomous heart. Anything goes. As for his true self, the only thing that one could be sure of was that he dressed in red and often appeared alongside a bloodbath with silver butterflies flitting between his sleeves. And when it came to Huachang's backstory, there were endless different versions. Some say he was born without a right eye and was bullied and humiliated for it since birth, so he was filled with hatred for the world. Some say he was a young soldier who died in a lost battle for his country and later came to walk the earth in resentment. Some say he was a fool who was tormented by the death of his love. Some even say he was a monster. In the most outrageous version, supposedly, only supposedly, Huachang ascended and became a god, but immediately jumped back down on his own and became a ghost. But that version wasn't widespread. No one knew if it was true or false, and not many believed it. It had to be false though. Even if it were true, it'd be a complete embarrassment for the heavens if someone ditched the heavenly official role to become a ghost. Either way, the more diverse the stories were, the more mystery he was shrouded in. There were also many reasons for the gods to fear Huachang. For example, his behavior was unpredictable. Sometimes he would carry out a massacre in cold blood, and sometimes he would do odd acts of kindness. He also wielded a great deal of influence in the mortal realm and had legions of followers. That's right, mortals worshipped gods to ask for blessings and protection so that they could escape the evils from the ghost realm. And that was how the gods came to gain so many followers. Yet Huachang, a ghost, had such a large following on Earth that he could influence the world single-handedly. Here's the story that must be told. When Huachang first appeared, he did something notorious. He openly challenged 35 heavenly officials. The challenge was to spar with the martial gods and debate with the civil gods. 33 of the 35 thought it hilarious, but were also infuriated enough to take up his challenge, thinking they could join forces to teach this little devil a thing or two. The first to step up to the plate were the martial gods. The martial gods were the strongest of the heavenly officials. Each had plenty of believers, and they were all powerful. In the face of a newborn ghost, it was a sure win. Yet, unexpectedly, it turned out to be a complete annihilation after one battle. Even their weapons were completely smashed to pieces by Huachang's freakish scimitar. It was only after the battle that they found out Huachang was born from Mount Tonglu. Mount Tonglu was a volcano, and within its mountainous domain, there was a city of Gu. The city of Gu wasn't a place where people cultivated poison, but rather the city itself was a great poison. Every few hundred years, tens of thousands of ghosts descended upon the city of Gu to butcher one another, until at last only one remained. And thus was the venom brewed. It usually ended in complete elimination, but those few who were capable enough to make it out alive would emerge as the devil incarnate. Only 2 such ghosts had ever made it out the city of Gu in the past several centuries, and as expected, those 2 both became well-known ghost kings. Hua Chang was one. After the defeat of the martial gods, it came time for the civil gods to rise to the challenge. Surely Hua Chang could fight, but not debate? Unfortunately for the civil gods, they could not defeat him. Hua Chang could recite the classics and debate the contemporaries. He was sometimes polite, sometimes vicious, sometimes unyielding, sometimes incisive, and sometimes quibbling. He was impenetrably sharp, his arguments flawless. He verbally abused the civil gods from top to bottom, past to present, and infuriated them so much that they puked blood and washed the skies red. Hua Chang gained fame overnight. However, that alone wasn't enough to call him scary. What was scary was that after the challenge, Hua Chang demanded all 33 officials to make good on their word. Before the challenge, it was decided that if Hua Chang were to lose, he would offer up his own ashes. If the officials were to lose, they must descend from the heavens and return to being mortals. If it weren't for his arrogant attitude and his decisive stake, and the conviction of the 33 officials that they would not lose, they never would have accepted such terms. However, not a single heavenly official voluntarily honored the terms. It was humiliating to renege on their bet, but when they thought about it, if only one of them was defeated, it'd be an embarrassment. But if all of them were defeated and humiliated, then no one would lose face. They could even turn around and mock the other party, so they all came to a tacit understanding that they'd pretend nothing had happened. Mortals were forgetful anyway. They would forget all about this in 50 years or so. They were not wrong about the mortals, but they were wrong about Hua Chang. The gods refused to fulfill their promise. That was fine. He would give them a hand. Thus, Hua Chang burned every single temple and shrine of all 33 gods. This was the stuff of nightmares for all the gods in the heavens. The red-clad ghosts burning of the 33 martial and civil gods' temples. Temples and followers were the main source of power for heavenly officials. Where would followers go to pray if there were no temples? If they didn't pray, there wouldn't be merits. The massive loss of temples and merits greatly injured the heavens. To rebuild would take at least 100 years, and even then, they wouldn't be the same as before. This was a catastrophe greater than failing in transcending tribulations. The number of temples and shrines of these heavenly officials combined was at least in the tens of thousands, but Hua Chang managed to burn them all in a single night. How? No one knew. But he did it. Pure madness. The gods cried foul to the heavenly emperor, but there was nothing he could do. The heavenly officials themselves accepted the challenge and the terms, and Hua Chang was cunning enough to only destroy temples without hurting anyone. It was as if he dug a hole and asked the gods to jump, and the gods themselves dug the hole bigger and dove in. With the way things were, what more could they have done? At first, the 33 heavenly officials had wanted to show the world the defeat of this crazed little devil, so they broadcast the challenge into the dreams of many royals and nobles to display their strength and might before their most devout believers. But all the royals and nobles saw was their miserable defeat. When the mortals woke up, they switched from worshipping heavenly officials to worshipping that ghost. The heavenly officials who lost both their temples and believers soon grew weaker and weaker until they were erased from existence. It wasn't until a new wave of ascensions that those empty positions were filled again. Ever since then, the name Hua Chang was feared in the heavens. Even just hearing a mention of red robes or silver butterflies brought cold sweat to many. Some feared he would challenge them and burn their temples if they were to incur his displeasure. Some were blackmailed into silence and inaction because he had them by the balls. And some even oddly respected him because of how wide his reach was in the mortal realm. Sometimes, they even had to ask him for help paving the way for them while they carried out their duties. This went on for a long time, and many heavenly officials developed a peculiar sort of admiration for him. Thus, the heaven feared, hated, and respected this ghost king. Among the 35 gods who were challenged, the 2 who declined were the General Sun Jian, Mu Qing, and General Nanyang, Feng Xin. They thought the challenge was beneath them and didn't care to take it. Turned out, that was the right decision to make. But even then, Hua Chang hadn't forgotten about those 2. Many Xiangyun festival patrols ended in fists and blood when both parties crossed paths with each other, and those crazy, maniacal silver butterflies left an everlasting impression on both men. Hearing this, Xilian thought of that fluttering silver butterfly that sparkled and danced adorably around him in delight. He couldn't picture it as described in the rumors. Was that little silver butterfly really that scary? Xilian wondered. It wasn't that bad. It was kind of cute.